4 p.m. my time, 3 p.m. Western African time. And we are ready to get going with the Griot panel for Screenwriting in Africa, Stories, Tools, and Future Forward Innovation. I am your moderator, Nikita Nel Mukhare, co-owner of Albantsho. I momentarily forgot my own company, yay. But I'm the co-founder of Albantsho, and we are currently powering this panel as well as the workshop, the iDraft workshop for our screenwriters this year. We have an esteemed panel of judges that I'm very excited to introduce to everyone. The first up is Mr. Femi Odugbemi. He is an award-winning screenwriter, documentary filmmaker, and CEO of Zuri 24 Media. They have produced TV shows such as Battleground, Brethren, Movement, Japa, and more. He's also been a voting member of the Oscars Academy Award, juror of the Emmy Awards, and a 4-time head judge of the African Magic Viewers' Choice Award. Next up on our panel is Dr. Samantha Israel Iwowo. She is the Bournemouth University senior lecturer with a portfolio of over 50 published screenplays, including the award-winning Oloibiri from 2015. She started off as a commissioned screenwriter for Mnet, went on to write dozens of screenplays, including episodes of the popular African drama TV series Tinsel. Next up on our panel is Mr. Yinka Ogun. He is an award-winning screenwriter with also a lengthy list of successfully published screenplays, including Royal Hibiscus Hotel, multiple award-winning Nigerian TV series Dear Mother, 2016 AM VCA Best TV Series Award winner, Daddy's Girls, Tinsel, Edge Paradise, the list goes on. He is a leading voice in the filmmaking industry, and he is also the head of the Screenwriting Guild of Nigeria. And finally, on our panel, but most certainly not least, we have Ms. Funmi Odushola. She is an expert market researcher, new product developer, and route to market strategist, who's going to be bringing something different to our mentor lineup. With an MBA from IE Business School, she is especially experienced in quantitative and qualitative data collection, as well as analysis and strategy development for deploying revenue-generating products. And you guys will see why this is so important in the upcoming panel that we have. So welcome again to our panelists. Thank you so much for being part of this. And we are so, so proud and honored to have you here with us. So we are all here to speak on screenwriting in Africa, stories, tools, and future forward innovations. So screenwriting in the film industry has always been lauded as one of the most important aspects of a film. You have to have a good story in order to make a pretty good film. So screenwriting software has evolved over the years, but technology in filmmaking has normally leaned more towards CGI improvements, as well as looking at the different formats that a TV production or a film can take. But nowadays, we're looking at more collaborations between, for example, screenwriters and computer programmers in gaming industries. We also have updated payment systems, we have digital contracts coming in, as well as talent scouting being mainly done online, all in a bid to increase the amount of screenwriters that we have in this industry. So now that the African film industry is catching up, catching up with everyone else, how far along do we have to reach a point where we can start being strong as well as confident in what we're producing and what we're offering the rest of the world? So this leads us to our first question. There's a word that keeps on coming up whenever we speak on African stories and African film, which is authenticity, redefining it, reclaiming it, and seeing how we can implement it into our films. Now, it's become quite of a buzzword. Everyone knows this word and everyone enjoys using it. But we would like to now ask Dr. Sam, how do you define and claim that word authenticity? How have you seen it, take on different forms throughout the years? And how would you define it in today's present day when it comes to the film industry and how it interacts with it? Dr. Sam?
So hello, everyone. Lovely to be here. Thanks, Nikita, for the introduction, and to Julie and the team for organizing this astonishingly brilliant conversation, which I suspect very strongly will be seminal. Seminal, not particularly because I am involved, but particularly because you have ideated something and actioned the idea into something very visionary. So I commend you and your team. So illuminating that the context of our conversation today is Africa, African screenwriting. And I, I like to use the term originality, to unpick this question of authenticity. And I very often say, and I believe that as an African screenwriter, that it is indispensable to us, particularly in this post-colonial world. And it helps us, it is indispensable because it helps us recognize that as writers, we are implicated in this global space of knowledge exchange, which globalization has created. And that so what we bring to this table of the knowledge exchange in the globe about our cultural heritage is equally valid and deserving of being heard. So, as writers, we are not parrots who echo some deliberately orchestrated rhetoric of some media for the advancement of hegemony. Neither are we conduits for unconsciously or consciously reinforcing overtly or subtly stereotypes about the inferiority of African storytelling or African stories or Africans. And for which reason, in coming to this table to have this conversation through our stories with the world, the originality of who we are is given an opportunity to gain expression in our work, right? And I'll give one instance. I recently observed a Nigerian social media debate on mental health, wherein Nigerian filmmaker Genevieve Nnaji contributed to the topic by saying that I think she was roasted for advocating a metaphysical approach to managing the crisis of mental health. So now, while I do not agree with the tone of absoluteness in her submission, because actually the spiritual treatment of such crisis is not the only valid way, I was concerned that her submission had been promptly, completely jettisoned by some, with the psychological approach to the treatment being enthroned as the way, right? But as an African storyteller, a decolonized approach, not the decolonized approach, a decolonized approach to engaging in this debate could be acknowledging that for Africans, the treatment of an ailment is multidimensional. And Dr. Luazi Lushaba of the University of Fort Hare underscores this point when he says that typically in ancient and contemporary African societies, in treating an illness, we recognize that the medical, emotional, and psychological aspects are valid and necessary to the healing process, but that the spiritual mediation to the divine, or a divine or some divines, equally plays a role. This nuance of our cultural realities in such a story would be enriching and authenticating to the cultural underpinnings of the story when it is seeded into the mise-en-scene in nuance. I don't know if I have answered your questions.
No, I definitely hear you, where it's a thing of authenticity relies quite heavily on, like you mentioned, nuance, understanding the different dimensions and understanding the different aspects that go into a multicultural discussion on whatever theme or story you're trying to tell. So with that being said, if we then look to Ms. Funmi, when we speak of nuance in within the word of authenticity, or like the doctor mentioned, originality, we are then now looking in place of research or archiving with storytelling. How does that now inform one's research, or how does one then go about informing that into their idea of originality and bringing nuance to a story? Ms. Funmi?
So thank you, everyone, and good afternoon. I'm really honored to be part of this panel of creative geniuses. I really do say that I have no creative juice in me, but I'm sort of glad to see that more and more African companies, and in Nigeria particularly, are seeing the use of the importance of using data and research in driving new product and introducing new and authentic stories, even in the place of creative work. So to answer that question, I actually just quickly extracted an open brief that is still on my table that says, an NGO is creating a mini series aimed to raise awareness and change attitudes among different age groups and countries. The series will be released on digital platforms, but also broadcasted on TV in, and it mentions the countries Niger, Burkina Faso, and some other Francophone-speaking countries. A study is needed before and after they watch the series. There are specific questions that they want to, and the questions are sort of like around the feelings, the perception towards the subject matter, do people understand the script, and then even just particular nuances. So even just to answer the questions of nuances, first, research is very important. I mean, they call it a study, but they want to sort of have a study to first understand what is the baseline or the target audience that we have. What is their understanding? What are some of the perceptions that they have around the subject matter? And then when we create a program and we want them to watch it, of course, you want the program to engage them. You want it to be relevant to them. You want it to also influence them in some sort of way, whether change their knowledge or their perception or their beliefs, or even create a sort of parallel behavior or attitude. And you want to be able to sort of measure that. To what extent has our content been able to do this? And there are particular nuances that are very important, especially like in this case, it's the Francophone market. It's also cut across the Francophone market. So there are certain nuances in Niger that is completely different from Burkina Faso. There are certain phrases that you say in one part of the same continent and it's an insult in another part of the continent. So you want to be able to capture this and make sure that, because you're not going to create content for every country, right? You want to make sure that your content can travel or cut across. And we see, just talking about authenticity of content, we see that artificial intelligence is being used in copywriting especially, but it's also being used in story writing, and people can go online and watch like short films, short stories of, there's even a speech from Donald Trump written by artificial intelligence. I mean, it's on YouTube. But the short films like Solicitors, there's another one called Sunspring, where they're using artificial intelligence to write the script from the scratch. So they feed in all these old scripts into the computer, and it uses patterns to sort of write a completely new script that is authentic. But when you watch this content, you can see that it's completely devoid of nuance. Like the computer cannot tell, in a way, in my mind, the way I can summarize, they can't tell the difference between sort of written speech and spoken speech. Sometimes when you watch a movie and you go back to read, I don't know if people do this, but you go back to read the script, I'm sure you do. I mean, we're in a script writing conference. You go back to read the script and you see how that script has been translated into visual. It's not exactly the same. So I think, especially when you watch this ones written by AI, you can see how it's read a lot of script, thousands of scripts, and is rewriting a completely new script, but it's completely devoid of the human interface and attitudes that is very necessary to actually get a very good content. And I think that's also the place of research, right? It's not just looking at old stuff and trying to repeat it. It's actually looking at your current environment and saying, how does my content actually influence? How does it actually translate to the target audience that I currently have? There are certain things we say or do now that if it was done many, many years ago, it wouldn't make any sense. There are even content from very long ago, some of which are my favorites. I really love old content. Gone with the Wind. But I feel like if I show Gone with the Wind to my 6-year-old niece, she's going to be completely bored. She's going to be like, what rubbish is this? But for me, it's like an absolute classic. It makes sense. So again, it's looking at the current market, current audience, and saying, I want to bring a product to the market, and how is the best way that I can sort of reach these people at their understanding.
Yes, no, definitely. I can see how research helps with the context, the zeitgeist of the society we're in, and making sure that the nuance speaks to that and that the story speaks to that. Femi, do you have anything to add on to that question or that thought?
First of all, thank you to yourself and to Julie, Daphne, and the entire Albantsho team for the opportunity to contribute here. I'm really very excited about your intervention and really interested in seeing how your generation drive the next, the next representation of what is the African story. And I absolutely agree with the earlier speakers, but I'm just going to add this to it. It's always important to understand that storytelling is a cultural practice. It's absolutely, so when you're talking about authenticity, it's actually not a buzzword. It's actually demand. When you're involved in storytelling, you're not involved in just an exercise of imagination. Storytelling is this mix of what was, what is to come. Storytelling is how spaces and faces and places combine to create what you call culture. Storytelling is about the things we know, the things we thought we knew, the things we are yet to know. Storytelling is really how we make meaning. And so if you're going to make meaning, authenticity becomes a requirement, not an option. There is a word, I think it's out of India, it's called puka. Puka it's translated literally means authenticity. But when you sort of break it down to its granular values, what it really means is truthfulness, the capacity to represent, not just in the detail and in the numbers and in the facts, but in the truth. And I think that's why filmmaking is so important. And that is why filmmaking also must be a team thing and not something derived from the imagination of one person. Because the problem with that is that you can only speak from how far you've lived, which then connects it to why research is so important. Research is not, it's important to have the numbers, it's important to know what the audience might look like. It's far more important to understand that also in storytelling, because it's an emotional, we're looking for an emotional reaction. However way that technology intervenes, films are not meant to be seen. Films and stories are meant to be felt. That's when it succeeds. It's when the person in the audience feels the story, which is why we concentrate so much on the character's journey. And that's why we create worlds. And that's why we create these, inciting, incidents and pursue to put pressure so that the character can make a choice. All those things are our representation of life itself. So it's really very critical to understand that if you're going to be successful as a storyteller, the first thing that you must challenge yourself with is authenticity, but authenticity culturally, so that the world you represent, in which your characters exist, is a world that has truth in it, not just geographically, but in terms of patterns, behavior, history, everything that you call culture. Representation is very critical to be accurate. The second thing is when you talk about authenticity, you're also talking about emotional value, how you write things so that people are not mouthing words, but actually creating, inhabiting characters. So it's not just about what you wrote, is also what you left, as silences and gestures, and all of those things come back again into what it is that creates the connection to the audience. And as Dr. Iwowo says, in a global world, all you bring to the table when you tell a story is really who you are and from where your stories come from.
No, very, very true. Thank you so much. So moving on from that wonderful ending to the next question, we're now looking towards Mr. Yinka Ogun, and we want to talk about the common pitfalls new writers seem to be making. So especially in terms of trying to stay authentic, original, true to your story, whilst at the same time being as universal as possible. What pitfalls have you seen, and what pitfalls have you been witness to with screenwriters trying to make these kind of stories? Mr. Ogun?
I'm honored to be here. For those who might not know, in my trajectory as a writer, one of the people who really drilled me and forced me to become the writer I became is Mr. Odugbemi here. So it's a big honor for me to be on the panel. I want me to have come up a bit on the panel with you. I'm feeling so good. So, in terms of what you said, let me just quickly say something about authenticity, which I find is a bit of a challenge in a lot of things I come across, in a lot of scripts I come across. Now, themes are universal. I mean, that's a given. It's the approach, the perception. It's those, like I said, we've been talking about nuances. Those are the things that make them authentic. I'll give you an example: multi-personality disorder or dissociative identity disorder, as it's called now. It's a universal thing. But if there was a case in New York, or there was a case in London, it's different from a case in Nigeria. Because what it will mean is that the socio-economic, there are a lot of socio-economic and cultural factors that will come to play. So if it happened in New York, most likely the first consideration for treatment will be medical. And then depending on the setup of the family, the background may be religious. I mean, and the religious will be Christian. Now, if it happened in Africa, you know that a native doctor will most likely be a consideration. The church is probably the first consideration before a medical solution is concerned. Now, those little things separate these issues. So when there's an issue and you go straight in a particular direction, it removes the authenticity of your own locale. I had a very interesting experience when I was in South Africa, and I was working in Generations, and we would have this brainstorming section, and we'll pitch stories. And I will start pitching the story, and everybody in the room will go quiet and look at me, and I'll be like, what's wrong? And they'll say, why don't they just go to the police? And I'll be like, because in Nigeria, we just don't rush to the police. But you see, that's the problem, because they would. Where I'm coming from, we wouldn't. So imagine me writing a story set in Nigeria, and any little thing, you just run to the police. So I think is this little things. Is the nuances, it's us being true, because even if you look at the meaning of the word authentic, it says of undisputable origin, not a copy, it is as it should be. So I usually find that a big challenge in a lot of scripts, because people are trying to ape foreign cultures. You understand? The characters are not real. I will read scripts, and the police detective is so cool, so suave, so everything. And I'm like, this is not like Inspector Dolapo that I know. Inspector Dolapo is not like this. But we're too concerned with, that prototype, that cool dude and everything. So it does not ring true. So and then Another challenge I've seen with a lot with our guys is yes, people are beginning to understand the need for research, but I'm sorry to say this might be personal, but I don't think research ends online. Sometimes you need to go there, you need to experience, because there's some things you won't find online. I'll give you an example. Years back, I wrote a script for Today Kilani. It was set in Republic of Benin, and I went to Republic of Benin, and that's when I found out that even though we import frozen chicken from Republic of Benin, they don't eat frozen chicken. They don't. Now, I couldn't have known this if I just stayed in Nigeria. You understand? So these little things, so it's not enough to just go online and do research. I know that sometimes you don't have the means to do this, but sometimes you could talk to people. When I was writing Oloturi, I became best friends with a girl that was in the thick of it all. We would hang out, we would have drinks, and that's where it ended for those of you with dirty minds. That's where it ended. But really, we spent a lot of time together, and she told me a lot of things. And it was communicating with her, I realized that there was a socio-economic angle to lubricants, and the high-class girls used, there's the popular one that they use, and then they steal each other's lubricants, and then you have the cheaper ones. These are little things that you cannot know just sitting behind your laptop. So I think that research is very important, because a lot of people don't research, they just assume and they write, and when you look at it, you realize that there's something very, very missing. And then lastly, I will talk about dialogue. Sometimes the dialogue just is a bit circumspect, because people don't really understand that how we talk is the sum total of all our experiences, where we school, the places we lived and all that. And then they just go there. And so you see this 60-year-old man speaking modern day slangs, and you've not established him as that kind of person. You understand? And so he's just there, he's educated, conservative, and he just, and then you see everybody says what's up. Everybody says what's up. It's crazy. But you know, so I mean, those are some of those little things, little challenges that I think that we writers have.
I see. Thank you so much. Yeah, and it is a very good points that you raise. Because then now we'd like to ask Dr. Sam, with all this being said, what does it take to start a career in screenwriting? If we're all in agreement in the need for originality and to be aware of the pitfalls we sometimes fall into, what would you say is required to really get into making screenwriting no longer a hobby or a random talent you have, but an actual professional career? Dr. Sam?
Research, just as Femi and Yinka have, and of course Funmi have unpicked, is the core of a storyteller's craft. You know, passion is important, and excitement about the story is important, setting out. But underpinning those two must be critical thinking and the prioritization of research. And I like to chip in to the conversation on research and then segue into setting out as a screenwriter. I think another reason why research is very important is so that we do not, beyond creating inauthentic stories, so that we do not silence or perpetuate the silencing of those whose culture or experiences we seek to recount in our stories. Right. So for which reason methodological research is important, and I emphasize methodology. I'll give you an instance from the Chinese director Chloe Zhao, who decided that she wanted to tell a story about travelers in the US. The film titled Nomadland. I don't know how many people are familiar with that. It won the Oscars last year. And what she did, understanding that it was not her culture, that she had not lived the experiences of travelers in the US, was she went into a community and said to them, in other words, I have a camera. I'm interested in adapting your story from a novel I have read. but I have not experienced what you have experienced. Could you help me tell your story? Now that's respect, right? And research, methodological research, helps us realize the importance of such level of respect. And it echoes what I very often refer to post-colonial scholars, because the conversation about African storytelling and the future and the present and the past is directly connected to our post-colonial realities. And Gayatri Spivak, in her conversations about subalternity, now subalterns, generally speaking, are those who have who are at the bottom of some socioeconomic, gender, cultural ladder, and who very often others tend to speak for, rather than them facilitating the environment wherein these people can speak for themselves. Okay, and so as screenwriters, I think the first thing we need to do is to educate ourselves on one or more established methods of qualitative research. What data are we keen to collect and why? What size of the data and why? You know, and how do we plan to analyze this data to gain the insights we need for our stories? Why do we need to do that? You know, there are contrary arguments that say that oh, such research is only necessary for academic studies, but it does empower your creativity, because you proceed to write in the assurance of the originality of your creative voice, that you know what you're talking about, that it is a relatively new contribution you bring to this conversation, because all storytelling nuances some debate, right? And more so, it enriches in turn a culture of ethically storing story developmental processes that can serve as a relevant data for future works by a screenwriter or an academic who is interested in the processes that have formed a story. I give one instance. We wrote Oloibiri in 2014 as part of my research. In 2019, when we were having a research excellence framework consideration in my university, one of the requirements for submitting that work as a research was to show the critical thinking that had gone into the development of the story. And in came the data. Archived it is now, but in the future, some screenwriter or some academic can decide that they want to tell a story about exploitations of oil in the Niger Delta, and that serves as some data from which to jump off if need be. So the importance of data in that regard to a storyteller is what I've been speaking about as one of the fundamental things that a screenwriter must familiarize self with, you know, in that regard.
Yes, no.
And
Yes,
also,
I completely hear that.
yeah,
Please
and
continue.
okay, and also I was at the I think a week or two ago, I was at the IREP Orange Exchange, and a fundamental question which brand strategist and storyteller Blessing Abeng raised was that a storyteller must develop the habit of asking why. Right? She underscores the question of why, which a storyteller is expected to ask, and some of the things along the questions of why are: why this story? Why by me? You know, why is it to be told now? And why this, or why to this audience? You know, and it helps us not only respect ourselves but respect others. You know, because we're asking the questions of what cultures are invited into my story, and how do I deploy them for the story's purpose, and how do I avoid cultural appropriation. And there is also, for instance, there is currently the polarizing debate about Will and Jada and Chris, and the unfortunate situation this raises is a timely conversation about jokes and the dignity of those who receive it. So such questions about why by a director and research by a filmmaker, a storyteller, and research by a storyteller help us apprehend occasions where we fall into such pits. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
No, yes, definitely. And it is something to be aware of and take notes of. And then just to add on to that, it's also now we have to talk about the rights that writers have. Like once you now have this career, you now need to know how to protect yourself and how to go about using the technology available to do so. So with this question now directed to Ms. Funmi, how can we incorporate technology to protect the rights of writers better? because we know that this is quite the hot topic when we talk about screenwriting as a career. Ms. Funmi?
Thank you. Before I answer that, though, I just want to sort of simplify how I think of research in my head, and I think it really helps. So, like Yinka or Doctor said, there are various sort of forms and types of research, and whether it's the methodology you're using or the data that you're trying to collect, but generally you have what we call primary data and we have what we call secondary data. Secondary data is what most people would run to online, something that already exists, some research document, even watching videos online is still secondary information. You're getting it from a sort of third-party perspective. It's not necessarily new information. So all that sort of goes into secondary data. But if you want to get something completely new, or you want to experience things for yourself, or for instance, again, just using the Anglophone versus Francophone market, the Anglophone markets in West Africa in particularly move very fast. Culture changes a little bit quicker than the Francophone markets, even just landscape. If you use Lagos as an example, a store that was selling clothes in January, you can go there now and it's either no longer there or it's selling something completely, like it could be selling building materials, right? But in the Francophone market, that doesn't really happen as much. Like things don't change that quickly. And so when you're especially working in markets that the landscape or the people adapt other cultures very quickly, it's very important that you get primary data. As another loose example, recently someone asked me about data for doctors in Nigeria. They wanted to sort of ask them two simple questions. And I said, it is very important that you don't rely on a database. Just go to the medical association and send emails or WhatsApp messages. People need to stop that and say, I want to do a survey. Because majority of those people will no longer be in Nigeria. And so the information you're getting regarding your product, which is in Nigeria, you want to take decision on, is therefore skewed, because we have an exodus of professionals in general, but more importantly, the medical field in Nigeria. So if you're doing something within that field, it's very important that even if you have data from just January, that you do a primary data, some sort of primary study to say, how many of you are still in the country? You're not working from Canada, and then say that you want to collect data from that. So on the primary side, then you have different methodologies, like Dr. had said, it could be an ecosystem immersion, like I like to put it, you take yourself there. Like Yinka said, he went to Benin Republic and you go spend some time in that culture, in that environment. It could be surveys, and I use that very loosely because people just think they can type something and shoot it out on WhatsApp. It doesn't work that way. You need to be very, cognizant or sort of particular about your target audience. I don't say my target audience is everybody, no. And so when you really define the profile of who your target audience is, they're not likely to be in your WhatsApp group or in your contacts, right? Or it could be focus groups, right? Focus groups helps you understand why. You're calling people together and you're asking a lot of very qualitative questions. Why do you do this? How do you do this? How many times do you think you pick up your phone in a day? Or it could even be diaries, people recording I remember a very big company, tech company, did a study where people were really just recording their diaries in terms of transactions they did every day. And at the end of that study, even I sort of learned that a lot of us don't think about our transactions. And there are certain things that we do, we don't even consider transactions. I send airtime to my security guard, for instance. I don't necessarily consider it a transaction. I'm just sending airtime. But all those little things, by the time people started documenting transactions for this diary project that the company was doing, you could find transactions in almost, like we're doing millions of transactions in a day without people actually necessarily thinking about it as a transaction. They think, when I go to the bank or I pick up my ATM or I'm using my banking app, then I'm doing a transaction. But there are millions of that. So again, just sort of quickly talking about the different ways research can help. Primary, secondary data, and of course, the primary is the most immersive and you're able to get very new information out of that. On the point of truthfulness, I use a simple analogy in statistics to say there are 10 of us on this call or in this room, for example. Dr. Samantha looks like, she's the richest. So she has $1,000 in her pocket. The rest of us have $0. She has $1,000, we have $0. Data would say on average that we all have $100 in our pocket. So it's taking that $1,000 in the room. This is how we get our GDP per capita, by the way. $1,000 in the room, there are 10 of us, we all have $100 in our pocket. If I go to, if you go to my pocket, for instance, I have zero. So there has to be also a little bit of human sense between when you collect data and how that data is translated into reality. The data or the statistics is saying that on average, we do have $100, but the reality on ground is that majority of us are poor. And this is how sometimes you look at the data about our countries, but the reality on ground is completely different. And that's because also of how that data, not necessarily that is wrong, but how it has been translated. It requires a little bit of sense to sort of be able to also tell the story of the data. To the point of incorporating technology, again, the same thing, technologies are there to help. And I know that sometimes there's a fear around, oh, this technology is coming and we are going to lose jobs and whatnot. And the simplest way I can put it is, sometimes you go to the supermarket and there's a guy at the end of the checking counter helping you bag your groceries. And then they maybe say, oh, we're having like an auto bagger coming. There's some machine they're putting there that will automatically, as you're buying your groceries, there are even stores right now in the world that you don't even need a human person. You buy, you get out, right? And this person is concerned that, oh, I'm going to lose my job. Technology is going to take my job away. Well, the best way to look at it is to say, first of all, you did not have a job in the first place because that is not a job, right? But it also means that as a human being, you can release yourself for something higher than what a machine can do. And at various levels, we sort of have this. So whether it's the lawyers who these days, you don't need your contract, very large contracts. There are technologies to help you read your contract and tell you where the red flags are and clauses are. But it also means that then lawyers can release themselves from spending a lot of time reading contracts and doing much more than just reading contracts. So in our professions as well, I feel that opportunity exists for technology to take over very mundial task for us to do something higher. So for instance, technology can help you scan plagiarism across scripts, for instance. We already use this in academic research, so why not, in creative work, and not just written scripts, but also from videos to, in fact, paintings these days, music. When music cases are going to court, the computer is telling you the similarities between the tones and everything to determine what extent plagiarism has occurred. There are other forms of technology that would also help our work in the future, blockchain, even technologies like, how do you write the technology of computer graphics into script? I mean, it's a technology that they're already adopting on one side, but how do you then translate that into your work? Things like licensing keys, streaming platforms that protection are already technologies that we use in one way, but it's also like really thinking about it. How can I get this technology to actually disrupt how I do work currently? So as an example, my company would completely only do work on the cloud. You want to start a document, we don't want to hear story that when you wrote the document halfway, then your hard drive crashed. That's a story for the 1980s. We're in 2022, we cannot be doing that anymore. So something as simple as a cloud, start your document or your work on the cloud. It shows authenticity. It shows who has it tracks who opened it, when they opened it, what time, what did they add. No version is ever lost. So these are just some of the technology that I believe that we can, very simple technologies that can be used to protect the work of writers. Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Yes, no, because thank you so much for that. Because then our next question is directed to Mr. Femi Odugbemi. When we're now talking about the realities of being a screenwriter, especially in the African creative industry, what are the specific realities we need to come to terms with, especially now that we're speaking about this in terms of using it as a career, how technology is helping, but there are certain realities we need to come to terms with. And what would your advice or what would your comment be on that, Mr. Odugbemi?
I don't know. I guess you have to be specific about the realities. I assume when you use realities in that context, you're talking about perhaps challenges, but I see the realities more about opportunities. it's very important to understand that Africa, the African story itself, is a huge opportunity. And the industries in Africa, creative industries in Africa, you know, have the most space for growth. I mean, the whole world right now are waiting for the African story. We've spoken for so long about how we have not had opportunity to tell our stories. We've said that for many years. Now we're in a space and a time in history where opportunity stares us in the face. Now we have so many platforms that are willing to commission projects. There are so many producers and production companies that are looking for the big story. There's also audiences from Africa that are now spread across the world. The diasporic audience is a huge opportunity for African writers. So Africa is just full of opportunities right now for storytellers. What is the challenge? Well, we have the challenge that a lot of our writers are not educated about storytelling. They have ideas, they want to tell a story, but they don't really quite yet understand the storytelling is both an art and a science. And in that respect, maybe there is a way in which technology needs to be leveraged. Because look, one of the things technology can do for you right away, to start with in terms of your productivity, is that technology can be your story editor. Technology can be your script editor. Because a lot of those who are writing, screenwriters, are trying to do all those functions by themselves. They find that their voice is the only thing that there's an echo chamber when they're writing. They write scenes, they know how difficult this scene was, and even if it's not working, they're going to keep it there because they spent nights doing it. And so there is a way in which they do not have self-accountability in the process itself. And I think that's really key because look, I've been hiring writers for upwards of 30 years now. And if you ask me what is the biggest challenge, it's not that we need software to help us with legal papers, because there are all kinds of templates for contracts. You're not going to redesign the will. Legally, IP is something that you are being paid for at the point that the producer is either buying your idea, buying your script, or commissioning it. Whatever is the case, whether it's a platform, a producer, a broadcast company, you are working by maybe a set of 2 or 3 options. If you want residual on your ideas, you can always say that as well. There is a template for that, and you can also, use that. So, in terms of reinventing the wheel legally, you don't need to. There's a whole load of them. But can technology help the younger script writers with, the processes itself? Writing screenplays is not just about pumping it out on your laptop and then it's ready because you said it's ready. No, because actually it's not in the writing that I think greatness comes for any story. It's in the rewriting. It's in the putting that story to account. It's in the looking at your character design and looking at it if in the event that there is something fresh about it. It's in how not just authentic, but how fresh your approach is. It's a something in the theme that keeps people thinking after your film is done. So if you ask me if there's a big challenge, yes, there's a challenge of how much people pay for stories here in Africa, and that needs to be dealt with. And I'm glad you got the president of the Screenwriters Guild here. that needs to be, not just in Nigeria, across Africa. The remuneration of the writer is, to say the least, not even equivalent to anything abroad. But that has also to do with the fact that, the currencies and the economies of most countries in Africa are poor. So when you put it together, if you went to the Screenwriters Guild in Hollywood, of course there are rates for scripts. There are standardized rates. So you can't in Africa write a story, and right now you still have the opportunity to say, okay, this is how much I want. I do think there is work for the guilds to do so that there is suitable and adequate remuneration for scripts, for final scripts done. But also, I think the guilds also have to work with, institutions like Albantsho coming up to deal with how technology's intervention helps with the bits and pieces that I, as a producer, need. Half the time, I can't shoot your first draft. I can't even sometimes shoot your 10th draft, simply because half the time, the process of reinventing the story or the process of, recreation becomes a pull and push, which is why sometimes a lot of the producers end up removing the writer from the process once it's paid for. But the writer is critical, not because the writer owns the story. And it's very important to understand that the story that the writer delivers is very important, but it's the beginning of a process for a film. And it's very important that the writer is able to transmit everything, to the producers, to the directors, and to ensure that at the end of time, when the film is made, is so much better than what was written. And I think getting that as the goal has to be something that writers embrace as an opportunity, not a challenge, because until it actually becomes a film, it's just paper.
No, very, very well said. And I think then, especially relating to what you mentioned, the last question for the last 4 minutes can go to Mr. Yinka Ogun. As the head of the Screenwriters Guild, what does structure in the film industry mean to you? How do you see us moving forward, not only with technology, but also just as a creative space, as a creative ecosystem in our different countries across Africa? Mr. Ogun?
I'll say something about that, and I would also like to say something about what Uncle Femi talked about. As the representative of the people who that really matters to, who that really concerns. I don't want to get distracted. Okay, let me just quickly say what I wanted to say when he was talking. The truth about it is that a lot of people who don't have any business being screenwriters are trying to be screenwriters. They really have no business there, unfortunately. And sometimes I can't tell them, because how can I be the one telling them? You understand? It'll be shattering, but they really don't have any business. When someone comes and says, so maybe someone calls you and say, oh, there's somebody who is interested in joining your guild, I would like you to talk to them. So I'm enthusiastic about it. Say, hello, how? I say, yes. So I'm interested in this writing of a thing. Writing of a thing. Writing of a thing, it's just, you have no business being a writer. And then they're coming, you understand? And their expectations are so high, they do not want to grow. The truth about it is that my first writing job, commercial writing job, it was for a radio drama, Ready or Not, by Communicating for Change. And so I was paid 15,000 for one script. It was radio, it was 15 minutes. Then I got the opportunity to do my first TV show. And I was certain I'd hit the big time. I was definitely going to buy a car in the next few weeks. And then I spoke with the producer, and he offered me 3,500. I almost passed down. It was totally against my maths, because I had calculated if radio 15 minutes was 15,000, then TV 30 minutes will be, but that was the reality on ground. And we rose through the ranks. And yeah, I thank God for the fact that at least now that it's making a lot of sense, at least I'm still there, but I rose through the ranks. I have a situation where I asked someone from my guild, someone got in touch with me and I said, do you guys have stories you want to pitch to a client? And some people got in touch with me and I said, how much do you want? And he mentioned some ridiculous amount. And I'm like, are you serious? Say yes now, but how much did you get for things? I'm like, seriously? Really? We're doing that? What have you done? You know, so that's it. A lot of them don't really know what they're doing there. They come there with a lot of expectations. They don't want to really do the work. For a lot of people, it's not just a means to an economic end. You understand? It's like, oh, I'm a writer. And most of them, you find out that they've tried doing other things, and now they've landed here. They want to be writers. So it's crazy. Then ridiculous expectations. You understand? And work ethics too is very important. Yeah, we can say so much about the producers and directors, but we need to look in the mirror too. Are we giving them the best of us? You understand? Are we giving them the best? Because I heard someone, so I once talked about doing 25 drafts for Luturi, and we had some kind of meet like this, and someone was like, they can't do that. After three drafts, the writer, the producer, the client must pay. And I'm like, I don't get why? You've not given value. You understand? Why would you be doing that? So if we ask for more, yeah, we can ask for more, but we also need to give more. They say he who comes before, there's that legal term, Funmi help me, come before the law must come with equity, right? Or something like that. So if we're going to ask for more, we ideally need to give more. And then also, if we come together collectively, we'll be able to find a lot of challenges, because we do have a lot of challenges. I particularly had one with a producer who had done the first draft of the show for the protagonist was male. And he calls me one day that, you know what, let's make that lead female. And I'm like, just like that. So as far as it's concerned, I just need to change the name from John to Janet. And that's it. And I'm like, sir, that's a new job. And it says no. So these are some of the challenges we face again. And so starting out, I think that one of the major challenges too is that people don't know that there's a need to train yourself. Yes, your friends might hail you for your storytelling abilities. Even the people in your family think you're a fantastic storyteller, but go and learn how to formally tell these stories. You understand? Is that how you're going to learn online, go to some school, and all that, and just learn. So, sorry, I got too carried away with that because I'm passionate about it. I'm the head of the guild, so passionate about it. Nikita, so what was the actual question?
Yes, no, definitely.
Yeah,
so the actual question,
yeah.
The actual question was just, no, please. It's all about the structure for the film industry. So how do you see that structure becoming in the African film industry, and how do you see Albantsho contributing to said structure?
Okay, so I think the whole structure thing is a general thing. It's like a hydra. So I think that no one segment can progress if the other is not progressing. Because if the producers want to do better jobs, the writers must tell better stories. The directors must improve their skill. The actors must up their game. So it's a collective thing. And as a guild head, I can tell you that we've been on some of these things for years, trying to come together and come up with some kind of structure that for working together, something that makes it easier for us to work together, which also be beneficial to the members of the individual guilds so that they can get better pay, capacity training and all that. So yes, we're working on that structure. When we get there, we will also need to now go religious and hope that there's a lot of transparency and honesty. between the players. Because part of what's happening now is that now that we have a lot of big platforms commissioning shows and everything, it's disappointing that it's not, the largesse, so to speak, is not really trickling down. Because what you have is a situation where, because people know that, okay, ideally, with a local producer, the best any local producer can pay you for a 1 hour show is probably 300,000 to 400,000 naira. And so, but you know that this show that you've been commissioned, ideally, it's probably about 2 million, 3 million if you convert it into naira. But now people are not paying that amount. So what they just do is that, knowing that the going rate is 300, they will now call you and say, you know what, guess what, I'm going to do a job for you and I'm going to pay you 1 million. Now, because there's such a huge disparity between 1 million and the regular 300, you are excited. But the truth about it is that that is not what you should be paid. You understand? So it's a big problem. And remember that before this happens, you have signed a 98-page non-disclosure. So you're just going to keep quiet and be grumbling every time they show the program because you cannot say anything. But that's the problem. So again, here we are, after we've done all the meetings and everything, we will still need to pray that eventually producers will get to a point where they will start being more upfront, more open about these things. So the actors get better paid, the writers get better paid, all these people get better paid. And before I go, let me just share some little anecdotes. So I was in a forum like this with some Hollywood writers, and the person that introduced me said I was one of the highest paid writers in Nigeria, and they had a lot of respect for me. They were gushing. Then one of them says, so Yinka, how much you get paid? So I said, sometimes 2 million, 2.5. Oh, really? How much is that in dollars? I changed the topic. Because how do I tell them it's $4,000? We don't even, in fact, they will remove me from that from that panel. You understand? So that's what Uncle Femi was saying. It's just a big problem. It's difficult for us to meet up because the economy is already a huge challenge. You understand? So I guess we'll just keep praying.
No, thank you so much for that. So we've reached the end of our discussion panel and moving on to the questions and answer panel side of things. So before we do that, if I could just ask each of the panelists to give just, a quick 1 to 2 minutes last words before we move on to the questions, starting with Dr. Sam.
So I'd like to, in conclusion, I'd like to say thanks for the opportunity to have been part of this very lively conversation. And my recommendation would be keep the conversation going. It's helpful for the growth of filmmakers, particularly Julie of your generation. Keep it coming, yeah? And thanks for inviting me.
You have a lot more to show. The creative industry has a wonderful future.
Yeah.
Ahead. And then moving on to Ms. Funmi, any last words?
I'll just say that the future is where, we've all heard of STEM, right? STEM or STEAM, where all these different forms from science to art are all blended, right? So if you take the gaming industry, which is pretty much an advanced sort of industry in terms of creative, you can see how from science to the creative, it's all been infused, and it's a billion-dollar industry for that reason. And this can happen, in our industry as well, or whether it's storytelling or in making movies or even in writing books, where from science to data, I think it was Mr. Odugbemi that said, it's not just the creative. Science needs to be infused into what we do. You can't just say, because I'm a creative, then you're a haphazard and it has no method to it. The science can be sort of infused. And I think, honestly, this would also help if our educational system infused this from the it's part of our background, our foundation. It's not, I am learning maths for a certain reason or science for a certain reason. Everything is infused into our daily lives. And I think it will make it much, much easier. I think I saw a question someone asking about, if I'm a creative and you're asking me to do all those things, research, how would my creative juices flow? Well, it would flow, but you need to put structure behind your creativity as well. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, that's very, very true, very wise. And Mr. Odugbemi, any last words? I hope I've been saying your surname correctly, hey? I've been saying it.
You're doing well. Yeah, last words. Well, I guess in my case, when you say any last words, sounds like I'm going to die or something. No, I tell you, here's what I'd like to really say to the writers out there, the young writers out there. There's a difference between being a storyteller and a scriptwriter. Sometimes both are inside the same person, but one does something far more important than another. A storyteller is in the business of imagination. And the biggest problem I find with a lot of writers is that they're in the business of regurgitation. They simply give me 100 pages of a film I've seen before. And because they don't understand that I've lived as long as I have and I've been around as long as I have, I've seen a lot of films. And it's very important for them to understand that just giving me 100 pages is not what I am paying for. I'm paying for a story. And the lack of imagination comes from the fact that they do not immerse themselves in life itself. They do not live expansively. They do not understand that when I get into a story, I want a world that is as wide as possible. I want to be transported. I want to have fantasy. I want different genres. I don't want a love story all the time. And I think that's really where the guild's problem is. The reason the producers will not pay more is because there's a lot of same. Now, because I'm a producer, I can say this to you. I'll pay the world for something that gives me an edge, something that's not been done before, something that makes my film stand. I've read scripts before that I said, this one will win an award. That is really the story I'm looking for. I'm not looking for 120 pages of what you typed. That's the best advice I can give. It's not the most palatable, but I hope it is something that people take to heart. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. And it's an honor to be on the same panel with Dr. Sam and Yinka. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, Mr. Odugbemi. And last but certainly not least, Mr. Yinka, any last words?
Yes.
Or final closing?
Closing, not last. Okay, first I want to say thank you to Albantsho for this. I look forward to future collaborations between us, especially with the Guild, and also myself as an individual. For people out there, writers out there, trust me, we're not perfect, but I think that the Guild is doing a bit. We're doing a lot more now than before. So I advise every writer out there to try and join the Guild. There's a lot we can do. And you see, when we have numbers, we become stronger. But when we, in a country that has about 7,000 writers and you barely have 500 people in the Guild, then it becomes a big problem. So we think that people should try and join the Guild. And please, if you want to become writers, please go online, learn, read stuff. I recommend read other people, read other scripts. Your favorite film, go online, look for the scripts, read. So that on your own, you can improve your skill level, because there's just so much, there's just so much we can do. I remember that it was some years back, someone brought a script and in it, there was a part that said, it was a breakfast scene and the guy goes, Mommy, won't you eat your bread, eggs, and tea? And she says, oh, no, 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 I don't want to eat egg, bread, and tea this morning. You get what I'm saying? Thank you very much for hosting me.
Thank you so much. And thank you again for the panelists joining us. I'll be giving it to Julie from Albantsho, co-founder as well. Thank you again. Julie, take it away.
Yeah. Well, yeah, thank you very much, Nikki. You did like a really fantastic job. And all the panelists that came. One of the things that we at Albantsho have been so much concerned about is not just being part of those who are accentuating the problems, because we do know that they exist, and we are more concerned about being in the midst of those creating solutions. And then that's why when we patterned the panel, we wanted to start from understanding our parts, the part that we play in storytelling, in scripting, and we started from understanding what authenticity is. And that also kind of opened my mind into understanding authenticity of our problems and realizing that the solution is already in there, so we are not going to say because other industries do it this way, but we are saying this is what is unique to us, this is what is happening here, and these are some of the ways that we can help ourselves come out of that conundrum of problems. And so we are like taking a step further to ensure there is progress, there is a step forward in the screenwriting industry. And we acknowledge that technology would have a very high part to play in all of this. Thank you so much, Funmi, for sharing that about, understanding that it's not just reading your contracts or having a technology that can spot the problem, but freeing up more human resources to engage in higher work. And that's it. We do recognize that writing is part of the higher work, but it's not just the talent that comes from nowhere. There is that important part of learning, of growing, which is why we love to have mentors talk to us. We cannot wake up one day and say, oh yeah, we have this fantastic idea and it's $1 million. And yeah, I mean, you can be lucky and your idea is $1 million, but if you want to create a trajectory for your career and want to create a step, then you must apply yourself. Like we must apply ourselves to learning and consistency and growing. And I'm very thankful to you, Mr. Yinka, for that this wide open invitation to also be part of what can help bring structure to guilt. Because as a writer, we want to have a body that protects us, and the body also wants to be able to assure the people paying you that you are bringing out quality. So it's a yin yang where we are getting better, we are exposing ourselves to education, and then there is this body that is there protecting our rights. And so it all comes in full circle, the panel, from this authenticity to technology to what the future holds. And Mr. Femi crowned it off by saying, I mean, there is a very, very, thing. There's a difference between a storyteller and a scriptwriter. When you start scripting, it's a business, and you're offering more than just, I have this idea. You are speaking to executives who want returns. You're speaking to technical people who want to break down your script, to be able to produce it, to be able to tell it visually. And so a lot of things go into screenplay that is just beyond you telling your story. And thankfully, the iDraft workshop, which kicks off today, is part of that one ideation process and the incubation process for us to learn to, take our stories to a format that producers are willing to buy, or producers are willing to, make into a business for themselves, because filmmaking is still a business at the end of the day. So that's my contribution to this meeting. I will say a very big thank you to all our mentors who have spoken to us, and their questions in the Q&A that has been shared. I'm sure we have about less than 20 minutes. Nikki, we can quickly go over some of these questions for our mentors to speak on. Yeah, so this one from Francis says, is it possible to start and grow in the writing industry completely self-taught? or is advanced training necessary? Mr. Yinka, do you want to take that?
I think that's pretty straightforward. You might be a natural storyteller, but you need to hone your skills. You need to learn how to format your skills properly. You need to learn how to tell your stories properly. You understand? You need act structures. You need a lot of things. So yes, you have your talent, but you need to learn. Now, learning does not have to be formal and regimented. It does not mean you necessarily have to go to a physical school. There are a lot of tools online. You understand? There are a lot of seminars. There are a lot of books you could read online. It's just about honing your skills. And if you can, try and get a mentor. Because the thing there is that the things that push you from being mediocre, that take you to the next level, those are the things that will make you stand out. Like I said earlier, when this thing started, I could easily have ended up being a regular mediocre writer, but I was fortunate enough to meet people like Mr. Odugbemi, people like Tajuddin, people like Oliver, who did not allow me get away with just writing on the surface. They forced me to search for the story beneath the story. You understand? Scratch beyond the surface. And so it gets to a point where it becomes instinctive with you to do that. But if you, no matter how talented and gifted you are, if you just go into the system, you don't have these extra things, you've not really learned all these, there's a strong possibility you're just going to expire on that level. So I think that some kind of training is always required. And I say that from experience, because I think that's what has helped me too.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Yinka. And this other question from Telka, she says, what really is the African story, with religion and colonialism being part of our experiences, being part of the experiences of Africans? Where does one draw the line between our experiences before colonialism and the present reality of who we are as Africans? Dr. Sam, do you want to take that? I think there are a couple of questions that are in line with that. So if I skip your question, just know that it's probably the answer.
Okay.
Dr. Sam, please.
Yeah, thanks very much. Yeah. The reality of colonialism and the reality of culture is that I'll answer that to culture and answer that to colonialism. The reality of culture is that there has never been an original culture. Now, that's a whole lot to unpick. However, in summary, I would say that there has never been an unspoiled culture, unspoiled in quotes, in that unless my culture is communicated to someone else, it is not yet a culture that can be seen, right, and understood. And in that moment of exchange, there is an influence that must occur for understanding to happen by the recipient. What do I mean? The recipient of my culture, of my conveyance of my culture, understands my culture in the context of their pre-existing knowledge. So that once that culture is transferred to the recipient and they contextualize the culture in the understanding of what they previously know, my culture has been modified, right? So therefore, the argument about speaking in our original African culture is neither here nor there. It is about speaking about the realities of what our culture is, haven't been modified over time. And to answer that question would be, for the person living in our post-colonial world, the first question to ask ourselves is, what is colonial mentality? In understanding what colonial mentality is, we can tell stories about the realities of our cultures in such a way that it is not inferiorized or minimized, while the Western cultures or the foreign cultures or the cultures of the erstwhile colonizers are reinforced. Does that answer the question? And then tying it to the question of, I think there's a question that's coming from Rejoice Abutsa, which relates to that question, is how do we tell our stories in ways that, how do we tell would the telling of our stories in the English language not minimize the authenticity of storytelling? Well, I will answer using Chinua Achebe's response. Since colonization has given us the English language or the French language with which to sigh together, right? We have much more to gain when we sigh in that language to return the gaze of colonial legacies. So if we spoke in our language, if we wrote in our language, we speak to a small section of audiences. But if we speak and if we write in the English language or the French language, and we make our arguments about the authenticity of ourselves and the validity of our cultures in that English language or in that French language, we speak to a wider audience. We gain more traction than we would have done in our language. Now, this is a debate that has been on for over 40 years, with the school of thought by Ngugi wa Thiong'o saying we should speak in our African language, and Achebe saying we should speak, as much as is possible, to the world in the language of the colonizer, just so that we can have a wider traction. I align myself with the school of thought of Achebe. I don't know if that answers the question.
It does. It fantastically answers a couple of other questions that, were in the same direction. And then we have this one from Joanne. Joanne says, but to what end can we be truthful to the story? And yet our major source of funding is the West. As such, we play to the piper's tune and pitch what we think they want to see.
Can I answer that?
I want to comment on that. Yes, please.
Can I answer? Yeah, with apologies to Uncle Femi and Sir Yinka. I think Nollywood did something that was phenomenal in its wake. Yeah, it developed what I call in my research defiant storytelling. It looked inwards. It told its story to its audiences inwards, right? It did not look to the government for funding. It did not look to the West for funding, and it gained traction across Africa as well as to diasporic spaces of the West, right? It answered a question which traditional African cinema had until that time, until now, I dare say, been unable to answer. How do we create a sustainable industry by mind space that galvanizes employment and employability? It was successful. It still is successful. I do not think that we help ourselves very much if we again shackle ourselves to the hegemonic structures of storytelling by, rather than looking at the minimalist template which had been successfully created by Nollywood, albeit unconsciously, in the start of the industry, and then looking entirely to formalized structures of funding, which have a voice very often, the voice being the maintaining of hegemonic structures of thinking. So it becomes a question of, again, our understanding of colonial mentality and our understanding of, do we understand sufficiently the revolution that Nollywood created enough to celebrate it and work within it and better it without again shackling ourselves to colonial legacies of funding?
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Sam. And there are a couple of questions about we're not able to get African scripts to read. Also questions in that regard to, so I think there are a couple of questions in that regard, and I would come back to that. But this question, budget for production has set a limit to how broad a writer imagination can go. What would you advise a writer to do in such a situation? Is it to stick with the original plan or wait for a producer who can handle the project? I would like effort to speak to that, because there are also some questions in relation to writing and budget.
Well, I suppose if you're commissioned to write a script and the budget is given to you, you then have what I call boundaries. But within boundaries, there's a there's a whole load of opportunity. The way I describe it to writers is, even if I build a fence around a plot of land, you can choose to dig and you can choose to fly. You can change entirely how you approach a story, because the three-dimensionality of the characters you create is really what will create the right kind of impact. Many of the scripts that I see young people write don't explore the psychological space of a character at all, don't speak to why the characters are doing what they're doing. Oftentimes we get what I would call a formulaic interpretation of what you would call the big themes. And in doing that, many people also create more problems. I find it, for me personally, incredibly disgusting that the same people that talk about women empowerment on social media are the ones that are constantly writing stories and love stories where for the woman to actualize herself, she needs a man. And so you find that there are many places to go that has nothing to do with budget, that has a lot to do with imagination, that has a lot to do with vision, that has a lot to do with, you know, not just originality, but, you know, making a point. What do you stand for as a writer? Those are things that I think are very important for you to also infuse into a script. I said it to a group a couple of days ago. You really know you are ready to be called premium. Your work is premium when what is demanded of you is much more than your talent. There will come a time where, you know, what you are known for is as important as what you know. And a lot of the writing, people don't pay more for them, and budgets can't grow, because when you say, okay, write anything you want, it's still the same thing, but just, you know, more expensively. There's a difference between, oh, there's no money, so we're using a Volkswagen, to, oh, there is money, and then you go for a Ferrari. The point is, both are transports. Okay, they may indicate the status of your character, but they really don't move the needle in terms of, you know, a wow moment. People say, oh, we didn't write a spectacle into it because we think it will be too expensive. It depends on how the spectacle is written. There are many ways in which producers can actually execute things if you write it to inspire the producer to do so. That's really one of the things I think is important. Anytime I've received a script that challenges me to figure out a way, I just grow in respect for the writer. But if you just keep talking about how, oh, I want to start it from the moon, the question is, what is the worth of the scene? What is the value of what you're spending? That's really what's important. If you can figure that out, it's much easier to relate to producers.
Yeah, thank you very much, Efo. Mr. Yinka, there's the question about how to join the guild. A lot of it has popped up several times. Do you want to quickly touch on how writers who are interested in joining the guild can do so?
So I was actually putting something about, should I type it there? I can drop the number of
the
you can
just drop
secretary. Okay.
Or we'll share it on our social media handle.
Okay,
well.
I'll send
get
it
all
to
the
you,
info.
then you share it. Yeah.
So I'll share all the information about the Writers Guild. For those who also ask questions about, you know, how we can read African stories, to be honest, part of the things that inspired us to start Albantsho is because of that. We wanted to say a particular point came up earlier on about how most of our references for stories are Western, and we need to create more nuance, and to do that we need research. But to do research, you need data, you need content, you need access to data. And so far so good. It's been harder for us to find data, but we probably have to do 2 times the work. But we need to start doing it now, as opposed to start complaining about not having them. And Albantsho existing is also an answer to that question. We're both a web application where writers and producers can have a better way to negotiate on story acquisition, and also an intuitive writing software and a bidding system is embedded in the Albantsho platform, which means along the line, we begin to have already produced African scripts that can be accessible publicly for educational purposes. And hopefully this can inspire the nuance that we're talking about. It can inspire reference to, real original content written by Africans. And so if there's any more questions that we have in regards to what we do, you can check us out on our website, www.albantsho.com. The iDraft workshop which starts today also is we'll definitely be sharing updates on our platform. I've seen a lot of questions about, people wanting to know their updates. That will also be sent today. Thank you so much, everyone, for being a part of the beginning of what we consider to be a very long journey to a better screenwriting atmosphere and a better filmmaking ecosystem in general. So check us out on Albantsho's platform on social media for updates. I would also be sharing the content about how to join Writers Guild on the platform. With that, Nikki, if you have any last words you can say. I've tried to keep to time. We're 6 minutes above our time. Nikki, I hand over the mic.
All right. So once again, just to echo Julie's words, thank you all so much for attending. Panelists, again, we are honored to have you here. And just judging from the comments that we've gotten, everyone appreciates your words of wisdom. Everyone has appreciated what you have given in terms of advice, in terms of knowledge, and in terms of experience. So we thank you once again, and we are looking forward to, along with the upcoming generation of the African creative industry, to really do something great and pioneer this movement, or continue pioneering this movement, to make the African creative industry for film and TV production something amazing, something as great as we all know it can blossom into becoming. Thank you once again, everyone. Please enjoy the rest of your weekend. Have a great time, and keep up to date with all of our updates and all of our extra information on www.albantsho.com. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye-bye.